At 0740 hours on Christmas morning, December 25th, 1944, Staff Sergeant Ezra Caldwell stood in a frozen foxhole above the Belgian village of Foy, carving his 18th wind marker from a pine branch he'd snapped off during the night. The temperature was 15 degrees Fahrenheit. His hands were so cold they'd lost sensation 3 hours ago. He could barely feel the knife blade as he whittled the stick down to exactly 18 inches, then notched the top with 3 horizontal cuts so he'd know which marker it was in low light. 200 yards ahead, across a field of snow that looked like white static in the pre-dawn darkness, German positions waited in the tree line. Somewhere in those trees, an enemy sniper was watching through a Zeiss scope, trying to understand what the American soldier was doing with all these sticks. Caldwell drove the marker into the snow with the heel of his boot. 18 inches of oak, standing vertical in the white. He'd planted 6 others at measured distances over the past 3 days. 100 yards out, 200, 350, 475, 550, 625. Each one a reference point. Each one a truth teller about something you couldn't trust with your naked eye. Wind. First Sergeant Garrett Thorne crawled up to the foxhole rim, his breath coming out in white clouds. He looked at Caldwell, then at the stick standing in the snow like a tiny flagpole with no flag. "What's the stick for?" Caldwell didn't look away from the tree line. Wind tells lies, stick tells truth. Thorne followed Caldwell's gaze across the field. "You've been planting those things for 3 days." "Yes, sir." "Battalion thinks you're marking positions for artillery. Battalion can think what they want. What are you really doing?" Caldwell finally turned. His face was gaunt from 6 months of combat, 21 years old, but his eyes looked 40. "I'm reading the wind, Sergeant. Same way I read it back home. Plant a stick. Watch how the snow drifts around it. Watch how it moves when wind hits it. You do that enough, you know where your bullet's going before you pull the trigger." Thorne stared at him. "You learned this hunting?" "Yes, sir. Squirrels don't sit still. Wind doesn't either." Somewhere in the German tree line, 800 yards distant, Oberleutnant Werner Hauptmann lowered his Zeiss scope and spoke quietly to the man beside him. His words came out in frozen German consonants that would have sounded like gravel crunching if anyone American could have heard them. "Was macht der Amerikaner mit diesem Stock?" What is the American doing with that stick? The other German soldier, younger, maybe 19, shook his head. He didn't know either. They'd been watching the American position for 3 days. The same soldier kept planting sticks in the snow at different distances. Then he'd sit in his foxhole and just watch them. Sometimes for hours. Never fired. Just watched. Hauptmann had 47 kills on the Eastern Front. He'd seen Russian snipers do strange things, use dolls as decoys, rig dead bodies to draw fire, dig false positions to confuse German spotters. But he'd never seen anyone plant sticks in snow and then just observe them like they were growing something. Ist verrückt," the young soldier whispered. "He's crazy." But Hauptmann didn't think the American was crazy. Crazy men didn't survive 6 months of combat. Crazy men didn't move with that kind of discipline. There was method here, purpose. Hauptmann just couldn't decode it yet. He made a note in his logbook. December 25th, 0745 hours. American sniper, second foxhole from left, continues placing wooden markers in field. Purpose unknown. Recommend observation. Back in the American foxhole, Caldwell settled into his position. His M1 Garand rifle rested against the frozen earth wall, within easy reach. The stock was worn smooth from 6 months of handling. The barrel had seen 347 rounds fired in combat since Normandy. 28 confirmed kills. Every one of them at distance. Every one of them calculated. Silas Brennan, sharing the foxhole, pulled his wool collar tighter and looked at his friend. They'd grown up 3 houses apart in Ashwood, West Virginia, population 462. They'd enlisted together on August 14th, 1942, walked into the recruitment office in Richmond, and volunteered for the parachute infantry because the extra $50 a month jump pay would help their families. Now they were here, Belgium, Christmas morning, surrounded by Germans who wanted them dead. "You really think those sticks are going to help?" Brennan asked. Caldwell pulled out his small notebook, the kind a machinist would carry to record measurements. He'd been writing in it every morning since December 22nd. Wind observations, drift patterns, snow accumulation around each marker. Numbers and angles that wouldn't mean anything to someone who hadn't spent 15 years learning to read weather like it was a language. "They already have," Caldwell said. 2 days ago, wind was steady right to left, 8 inches at 400 yards. Yesterday morning, shifted to left to right, 9 inches at the same distance. If I hadn't planted stick number 3, I wouldn't have known. "You haven't fired a shot since we got here." "Haven't needed to." "You've got 28 kills since Normandy. You planning on making it 29? Caldwell looked at his friend. "When the time comes." What Brennan didn't know, what nobody in Easy Company really understood except maybe Thorne, was that Caldwell wasn't just counting kills, he was counting lives. Every German he dropped was one less gun firing at his friends, one less grenade thrower, one less man trying to overrun their position. But the kills weren't the point. The point was seeing, understanding, reading the invisible. Wind was invisible, but it moved things. It changed trajectories. It turned a perfect shot into a miss, and a miss into a widow's telegram. So you had to see it, not with your eyes, but with your attention. That's what the sticks were for. 6 years earlier, when Ezra Caldwell was 15 years old, his father Nathaniel had taught him the same lesson in the mountains above Ashwood. They'd been hunting white-tailed deer on a November morning in 1938. Cold enough to see your breath, not cold enough to freeze the creek, the kind of weather where deer moved early and bedded down by noon. Ezra had spotted the buck from 200 yards, 8-point, maybe 180 pounds, standing in a clearing, head down, feeding on winter grass that hadn't died yet. He'd raised his rifle, a single-shot .22 Winchester that had belonged to his grandfather. If you missed, you didn't get a second chance. The deer would be gone before you could reload. His father put a hand on the barrel, lowered it. "Not yet." "He's right there." "Wind's not right." Ezra looked at his father. "There's no wind." Nathaniel Caldwell picked up a stick from the ground, about a foot long, walked 10 paces forward and drove it into the soft earth. Then he stepped back beside his son. "Watch." They stood there for maybe 2 minutes. Ezra didn't understand. The stick just stood there. It didn't move. There was no wind. Then his father pointed. "Look at the grass behind the stick." Ezra looked. The grass on the left side of the stick was bent slightly. The grass on the right side stood straighter. It was so subtle you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. "Wind's coming from your right," his father said. "Maybe 2 miles an hour. You can't feel it, but it's there. At 200 yards, that'll push your bullet 6 inches left. You aim at the deer's heart, you'll hit shoulder bone, wound it, it'll run. You'll track blood for 2 miles and never find the body. Waste of an animal. Waste of a bullet." "How do you know?" "Because I've done it. Learn the hard way. Now I plant a stick first. Every time. Watch what the wind does around it. Wind can't hide from a stick." His father pulled the rifle up, aimed 6 inches right of the deer's chest, and fired once. The buck dropped. Clean kill, heart shot. They'd walked over to claim it. The bullet hole was exactly where it needed to be. 1 shot. No suffering, no waste. "Wind tells lies," his father said, field dressing the deer. "Stick tells truth. You remember that, you'll never go hungry." Ezra never forgot. The lesson took root in his mind the way only lessons learned through hunger could. In Ashwood, West Virginia, during the Depression years, missed shots meant empty plates. His family couldn't afford to waste ammunition. His father made $17 a week working the coal mines. A box of 50.22 cartridges cost 35 cents. Every bullet had to count. So Ezra learned to make them count. By the time he was 16, he could plant a stick at 300 yards and tell you the wind drift at that distance within an inch. He'd spend entire afternoons in the mountains, planting markers at different ranges, watching how weather moved around them, learning to read the invisible language of air currents and thermal flows. By 17, he could do it at 400 yards. The mathematics became instinctive. Wind speed, distance, bullet weight, drop rate. Variables that most hunters never considered because they never shot beyond 100 yards. But Ezra's family needed meat from ranges where other hunters wouldn't even try. So, he learned to try, and to succeed. By 18, he'd developed what the other boys in Ashwood called his parlor trick, though there was nothing frivolous about it. It was survival mathematics expressed through muscle memory. He'd stand in a clearing behind the Caldwell house. His father and Brennan and a few other boys from town would watch. Ezra would pull a coin from his pocket, usually a penny, sometimes a nickel, and toss it 15 feet straight up into the air. Then he'd shoulder the point 2-2, track the coin's arc as it climbed against the grey Appalachian sky, calculate its trajectory, estimate where it would be in the fraction of a second it took the bullet to travel 15 feet, and fire while the coin was still rising. The coin would hit the ground with a hole punched clean through the center. Not the edge, not a graze, dead center. People thought he was aiming at the coin. He wasn't. He was aiming at the space the coin would occupy when the bullet arrived. The intersection point of two moving objects through three-dimensional space. It was geometry, physics, the same spatial reasoning his father used underground in the mines, calculating how to place charges to bring down coal without bringing down the tunnel.
Ezra's father watched him do it once and just nodded. Didn't praise, didn't criticize, just acknowledged that his son had learned the lesson, had understood that shooting wasn't about pointing at targets, it was about understanding systems, seeing relationships between things that moved and things that seemed still but never were. The real lesson wasn't about shooting at all, it was about attention. Most people looked at the world and saw surfaces, trees, sky, deer, coins, static objects in fixed positions. Ezra had learned to see deeper, to see wind that moved branches, distance that changed angles, time that transformed where things were into where they would be. He saw the space between intention and impact, the gap between pulling a trigger and a bullet arriving. And he learned to calculate that gap so precisely that he could put holes through coins in mid-air or drop deer at ranges that made other hunters shake their heads. That skill kept his family fed through the worst years of the Depression, kept them alive when a missed shot meant his younger sister went to bed hungry. It became so natural, he stopped thinking about it. The calculations happened faster than conscious thought. He'd just point the rifle and know where the bullet would go, the same way his father knew which wall of coal would crack and which would hold, the same way his mother knew which herbs would cure fever and which would just waste time. Knowledge built through repetition and consequence, through necessity that didn't forgive mistakes. In June 1940, Ezra graduated from Ashwood High School, 17th in a class of 23. He was smart enough, but not bookish. His intelligence ran toward mechanical things, spatial relationships, how parts fit together to make wholes. The school counselor suggested he apply for a machinist apprenticeship at Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth, Virginia. The Navy was expanding. War in Europe meant ships needed building. Ships needed parts. Parts needed machinists who could work to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. Ezra applied, got accepted, left Ashwood in August 1940 with a cardboard suitcase and $17 his father had saved. Norfolk Naval Shipyard was a different world, massive, industrial, ships the size of buildings sitting in dry docks, cranes that could lift locomotives, the constant sound of metal being cut, welded, shaped into components for destroyers and battleships and submarines. Ezra's apprenticeship put him on lathes and milling machines. The work was exacting. You were given a blueprint with specifications, a piece of raw steel, and instructions to create a part that matched the blueprint exactly. No approximations, no close enough. If the specification said 2.3750 inches, you cut to 2.3750 inches, not 2.3748, not 2.3752, exactly 2. 3,750, measured with micrometers that could detect variances
smaller than a human hair. Because if you cut it wrong, if your tolerance was off, that part would go into a ship, and that ship would go to war, and men would depend on that part working under stress and fire and the violence of combat. A bad bearing could seize an engine, a weak fitting could rupture under pressure, a misaligned gear could strip and leave men dead in the water while enemy guns found their range. So you measured twice, cut once, checked 3 times, and you didn't make mistakes. Ezra was good at it, better than good. His hands had the steadiness that came from holding rifles. His eyes had the precision that came from calculating bullet trajectories. His mind had the spatial awareness that came from 3-dimensional thinking about wind and distance and moving targets. By his 2nd year, he was cutting parts that passed inspection on the first try 97% of the time. The other apprentices averaged 72%. The difference was attention. The same attention he'd learned planting sticks in West Virginia mountains. See what's really there. Not what you want to be there, not what should be there, what is actually there, measured and verified and confirmed. He worked at Norfolk for 2 years, made decent money, sent half of it home to Ashwood, saved the rest, learned precision that would later translate to trigger control and sight alignment and the microscopic adjustments that separated killing shots from near misses. But in August 1942, everything changed. Brennan showed up at Ezra's boarding house on August 14, 1942. Hadn't seen his childhood friend in 2 years. They'd written letters. Brennan had been working construction in Richmond, making okay money, nothing special. "There's a war on," Brennan said. "Real war now, not just Europe. We're in it." Ezra knew. Everyone knew. Pearl Harbor had happened 9 months ago. The United States was fighting Japan in the Pacific, fighting Germany in North Africa. The war was everywhere. "You thinking about enlisting?" Ezra asked. "Already decided. Came to see if you'd come with me." They walked to the recruitment office that afternoon, a storefront office with a flag out front and a poster showing Uncle Sam pointing at whoever looked at it. The message, "I want you." The recruiter was a staff sergeant, maybe 35 years old, combat infantry badge on his chest from the last war. He looked at the 2 young men and saw what recruiters always saw: raw material. "What brings you in?" "Want to volunteer," Brennan said. "Both of us." "Any preference on branch?" "Parachute infantry," Ezra said. The recruiter raised an eyebrow. "Why airborne? Most men want regular infantry, easier training, less chance of breaking your legs jumping out of airplanes." "Extra $50 a month jump pay," Ezra said. "My family could use it." The recruiter nodded. "Fair reason. Can you shoot?" "Yes, sir." "How well?" "Well enough." The recruiter didn't push. Well enough would be determined later. For now, he just needed bodies. The 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment was forming at Camp Toccoa, Georgia. They needed replacements for men who washed out of jump school, needed warm bodies willing to throw themselves out of airplanes and fight Germans. He pushed 2 enlistment forms across the desk. "Sign here. Report to Toccoa September 1st. Bring nothing but the clothes on your back. Army'll provide the rest." Ezra signed. Brennan signed. They walked out of the office as soldiers. Ezra wrote his father that night, told him he'd enlisted, told him the $50 a month extra would go home to Ashwood, told him not to worry. His father wrote back 3 days later, 1 paragraph. Nathaniel Caldwell wasn't a man who wasted words. "You learn to see what others miss. That skill will keep you alive. Use it. Come home. Dad." Ezra kept that letter in his pocket through the entire war. Read it sometimes when he needed to remember why he was doing what he was doing, why the calculations mattered, why attention was the difference between living and dying. Camp Toccoa, Georgia, September 1942. The training was brutal, designed to break men who couldn't handle the physical and mental demands of airborne infantry. Running up and down Currahee Mountain, a 1,700-foot peak that recruits climbed until their legs gave out. Obstacle courses, forced marches with full packs, jump training where you learn to exit an aircraft at altitude and not freeze in the door. Ezra handled it. Wasn't the fastest runner, wasn't the strongest, but he was steady, consistent, never quit. The instructors noticed. Steady men lived longer than fast men in combat. But it was on the rifle range that Ezra stood out. The army issued each man an M1 Garand rifle, a beautiful weapon for its time. Semi-automatic, gas-operated, fired
30-06 Springfield ammunition from an 8-round on-block clip that pinged when it ejected. 9.5 pounds fully loaded. Effective range listed as 500 yards. Most soldiers couldn't hit targets reliably past 300 yards. The Garand's iron sights, a front post and a rear aperture, required skill to use effectively at distance, and the rifle kicked. The .30-06 round generated significant recoil. After 20 rounds, most men's shoulders were bruised and their accuracy degraded. Ezra qualified on the range the second week of training. 200 yards, 5 rounds, iron sights, standard man-sized target. He put all 5 rounds in a 10-inch circle, center mass. The range instructor looked at the target, looked at Ezra. "You shoot before?" "Yes, sir." "Where'd you learn?" "West Virginia, hunting." "Well, you're better than hunting accuracy. You're sniper material." But the army didn't have sniper positions in airborne units. Snipers were specialized roles in regular infantry divisions. Men who went to dedicated schools, who learned advanced fieldcraft and ballistics, who received scoped rifles and trained for months on long-range shooting. Airborne infantrymen were different. They were shock troops, first in, light infantry. They jumped behind enemy lines and fought with what they carried. Speed and violence of action, not precision shooting. So Ezra was designated a rifleman, not a marksman, not a sniper, just another soldier with a Garand. But the instructors kept watching him. At 300 yards, he put 5 rounds in an 8-inch circle. At 400 yards, 10 rounds in a 12-inch circle. At 500 yards, the maximum range for qualification, he put 10 rounds in a 15-inch circle. In a crosswind, without adjusting his sights. First Sergeant Garrett Thorne watched through binoculars as the target markers came down. Every hit inside the scoring zone, most in the center.
He walked over to Ezra after the range went cold. "How'd you do that?" "Do what, Sergeant?" 500 yards, iron sights, 15-mile-per-hour crosswind. You put every round on target. Most men can't even see the target clearly at that range." Ezra shrugged. "I watched the flags, saw which way the wind was blowing, held left to compensate." "You didn't adjust your sights?" "No, Sergeant, didn't need to. I know where the bullet goes when I aim left of target." Thorne stared at him. "You learned this hunting?" "Yes, Sergeant." "What were you hunting?" "Squirrels, mostly. Some deer." "Squirrels?" Thorne said it like he didn't believe it. "You're telling me you learned to compensate for wind at 500 yards by shooting squirrels?" "Yes, Sergeant. Squirrels don't sit still. You learn to lead them, to account for wind, to make the first shot count because you don't get a second." Thorne made a note in his logbook, wrote down Ezra's name, wrote, "Natural shooter, compensates for wind by observation, recommend monitoring in combat conditions." Then he walked away without another word. Other soldiers had seen Ezra shoot. Word spread. The kid from West Virginia who could hit targets at ranges where most men couldn't even see them clearly. They started calling him Kentucky Caldwell, even though he corrected them every time. "West Virginia," he'd say. "Same difference," they'd reply. "You shoot like those Kentucky long riflemen from the old days." The name stuck anyway. Kentucky windage. Holding off target to compensate for wind, doing it by feel, by instinct. But Ezra wasn't doing it by instinct, he was doing it by observation, by seeing things that were there but invisible. Wind flags moving, grass bending, dust drifting, the 1,000 small indicators that told you which way air was flowing and how hard. The same things a stick told you when you planted it at distance and watched how weather moved around it. Lieutenant Owen Blackwell watched Caldwell shoot one afternoon in October 1942. The company was running live fire exercises, moving under fire, engaging pop-up targets while advancing. Most men fired on the move, sprayed rounds, suppressive fire. The doctrine was volume, not precision. Keep the enemy's head down while you close distance. But Caldwell would stop, plant himself, acquire the target, fire once, move, and the targets would go down. Blackwell watched him drop 7 targets in one exercise, 7 shots, 7 hits, ranges from 150 to 400 yards, while other soldiers were burning through 8-round clips and hitting maybe half their targets. After the exercise, Blackwell pulled Caldwell aside. "You shoot like you're pointing at something instead of aiming at it." "Not sure what you mean, sir." "Most men line up their sights, take time, aim deliberately. You just bring the rifle up and fire, like you're pointing your finger at something you want to touch."
I suppose that's accurate, sir. How do you do it?
"I see where the target is. I see where the bullet needs to go to hit it. I point the rifle at that spot. I fire. It's not complicated." "You're accounting for distance, drop, wind?" "Yes, sir, but I'm not thinking about it. I just know where to point based on what I see." Blackwell made a note in his officer's log. "Private Caldwell shoots with unusual proficiency. Appears to calculate ballistics instinctively. Recommend observation in combat conditions to determine if skill transfers under stress." But there was no time for specialized training. The 506th PIR was preparing for deployment. They had to finish jump school, learn small unit tactics, train on weapons beyond the Garand. Machine guns, mortars, grenades, everything an airborne infantryman needed to fight behind enemy lines. The shooting would matter later, when the training became real, when targets shot back. June 6, 1944, D-Day.
Ezra jumped into Normandy at 0130 hours.
C-47 transport dropped from 600 feet over the French coast. The jump was chaos. German anti-aircraft fire, tracers cutting through darkness, men scattered across miles of countryside. Ezra landed in a flooded field near Sainte-Mère-Église, hit the water, went under, came up gasping. His equipment weighed him down. He struggled to shore, ditched his reserve chute, found solid ground. He was alone. No idea where his unit was. No idea where he was in relation to the drop zone. He spent 12 hours moving through the dark, avoiding German patrols, using his cricket, a small metal noisemaker that clicked twice when squeezed. The recognition signal. 1 click meant possible enemy. 2 clicks meant friendly. By 1400 hours June 6th, he found elements of Easy Company near a small village. They'd taken casualties during the drop. 3 men dead, 7 wounded. The rest scattered. By June 7th, most of the company had assembled.
Their mission? Clear German positions along the causeways leading into Carentan. Secure the routes for follow-on forces.
The hedgerow country of Normandy was perfect for defense. Ancient stone walls, thick vegetation, sunken roads that had been there since Roman times. The terrain broke line of sight into fragments. You couldn't see 50 feet in any direction. German machine gun crews used it perfectly. Set up in concealment, fire a burst, relocate before American artillery could respond. It was killing Easy Company in pieces. On June 12, 1944, Ezra Caldwell killed his first 2 men. Easy Company was moving down a sunken road, column formation. Lieutenant Blackwell at the front with the lead squad, Ezra near the rear with his squad. At 1430 hours, automatic weapons fire erupted from a hedgerow 200 yards ahead. The distinctive sound of an MG-42, German machine gun, fired 1,200 rounds per minute, sounded like cloth tearing. Men called it Hitler's buzzsaw. The company went flat. Officers shouted orders, men returned fire. But they couldn't see the target. The gun was somewhere in the hedgerow, hidden behind stone and vegetation. Ezra was at the rear of the column. He went prone behind a small rise, put his Garand to his shoulder, looked through the iron sights at the hedgerow. He didn't look for the gun, he looked for the thing that didn't belong. Every hedgerow in Normandy had a specific texture. Branches grew in predictable patterns. Vegetation filled gaps in stone walls. Light and shadow created natural contrasts. But this hedgerow had something wrong. A dark patch on the left side, too uniform, too symmetrical. The shadow pattern was off. That was where the gun was. Ezra reached down and broke a twig off the bush beside him, maybe 6 inches long. He pushed it into the soft earth at his feet, vertical, like a tiny flagpole. He watched it for 10 seconds. The twig bent slightly to the right, maybe 10 degrees. Not much, but enough. Wind was coming from his left. At 200 yards, that would push his bullet approximately 8 inches right. He aimed 8 inches left of the dark patch, held his breath, squeezed the trigger. The Garand's report cracked. The rifle kicked into his shoulder. He worked the action. The semi-automatic mechanism ejected the spent casing and chambered a fresh round. He fired again. Same spot, compensating 8 inches left. Then again. Walking shots across a 3-foot horizontal line. 8 rounds total. The entire on-block clip. The MG-42 stopped firing. Silence for 10 seconds. 20. 30. Officers shouted for the company to advance. They moved up cautiously, reached the hedgerow, found the gun emplacement. 2 dead Germans behind a camouflage position. They'd cut a firing port through the stone wall, covered it with vegetation. Perfect concealment from the front. 1 German had been hit in the head, the other twice in the chest. Ezra's shots. Lieutenant Blackwell looked at the bodies, looked back down the road at where Ezra's position had been. 200 yards. Iron sights. Through concealment, he couldn't have seen clearly. Blackwell walked back, found Ezra reloading his Garand. "How did you see that position?" "Didn't see it, sir. Saw where it shouldn't have been." "What does that mean?" "The hedgerow looked wrong. Shadow pattern didn't match. That's where I aimed." "You fired blind?" "Not blind, sir. I saw the anomaly. Adjusted for wind using the twig I planted. Walked shots across where the gun had to be." Blackwell stared at him. "You adjusted for wind using a twig?" "Yes, sir. Wind was left to right. 8 inches at 200 yards. I held left to compensate." Blackwell didn't know what to say. He walked away, shaking his head. But Garrett Thorne, who'd been watching from 30 yards away, understood. This was what he'd seen on the range at Toccoa. This was that natural shooting ability applied in combat. The kid from West Virginia was reading landscapes and wind and calculating shots faster than trained snipers. 2 Germans dead. June 12, 1944. Ezra Caldwell's first kills. That night, Ezra threw up behind his foxhole. Brennan found him there, sitting in the dirt, shaking. "You okay?" "I just killed 2 men. They would have killed us." "I know. Doesn't make it easier." Brennan sat beside him, didn't say anything, just sat there while his friend processed what he'd done. The transition from target shooting to killing humans. But the skill worked. The method worked. And as Easy Company pushed through France over the next 5 months, Ezra kept using it. He'd find a twig or stick, plant it before engaging, watch the wind, calculate the drift, fire. By the end of June, 8 kills. By the end of July, 14 kills. August through November, steady accumulation. Every engagement, every time Germans appeared at distance, Ezra would plant his marker, read the wind, make the shot. Other soldiers started noticing. The kid from West Virginia who always planted sticks before he shot. They thought it was superstition, a good luck ritual, like carrying a photo of a girl back home or a rabbit's foot in your pocket. It wasn't superstition, it was applied physics. Garrett Thorne figured it out in October, watched Caldwell plant a stick, observe it for 90 seconds, then drop a German machine gunner at 430 yards with 1 shot. After the engagement, Thorne approached. "The stick, you're reading wind with it?" "Yes, Sergeant." "How?" Caldwell explained. How he'd learned it from his father. How snow or grass or dust moved around a planted marker. How that movement told you wind speed and direction. How you could use that information to calculate drift at any distance. Thorne listened, nodded. "How reliable is this?" "Very, Sergeant. Works at any range if I can see the stick clearly.
Does anyone else in the company know this technique? No, Sergeant. Good. Keep doing it. Don't talk about it. Just keep doing what you're doing. Yes, Sergeant. By December 19th, 1944, when Easy Company was loaded onto trucks and rushed to Bastogne as part of the emergency response to the German Ardennes offensive, Ezra Caldwell had 28 confirmed kills. Everyone at distance, everyone calculated, everyone preceded by planting a stick and reading wind that other soldiers couldn't see. And he'd learned something else over those 6 months. The stick technique didn't just help him shoot better, it made him see better. When you spent hours watching how wind moved around a planted marker, you started noticing other things, how snow drifted differently around natural objects versus artificial ones, how trees swayed in patterns that revealed German observers watching from branches, how shadows changed when something that shouldn't be there was there. It made him better at observation, better at spotting camouflaged positions, better at reading terrain. On December 29th, that enhanced observation would save 150 American lives when he noticed a tree in a German tree line that hadn't been there the day before. But that was still 10 days away. First, he had to survive Bastogne. First, he had to plant his sticks in the frozen snow and kill 75 Germans in 6 days. First, he had to become the most effective rifleman in Easy Company's history. The 101st Airborne Division reached Bastogne on December 19th, 1944, transported in the backs of open trucks, cattle trucks, whatever vehicles could be found, and pressed into service. No winter uniforms. The army had expected the war to end by Christmas, expected to be occupying Germany by now, not fighting a desperate defensive battle in Belgium. Temperature was 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Men wore standard wool uniforms, wool jackets, wool pants, not nearly enough for prolonged exposure. German forces were encircling Bastogne from 3 sides. The town was strategically vital, crossroads, supply routes. If the Germans took Bastogne, they could push west, split Allied forces, maybe reach the coast. But first, they had to break the 101st Airborne. Easy Company was assigned to Bois-Jacques, a pine forest northeast of Bastogne, overlooking the village of Foy. Good defensive terrain, high ground, clear fields of fire to the north. They dug foxholes in frozen earth, used bayonets, helmets, bare hands when tools weren't enough. The ground was frozen 18 inches down. Digging took hours. Men rotated. 20 minutes digging, 20 minutes warming hands. Repeat. Ezra and Brennan dug their foxhole 4 feet deep and 6 feet long. Rectangular pit. They'd take turns sleeping and watching. But before they finished digging, Ezra was already walking the perimeter, collecting sticks, finding suitable pieces, breaking them to specific lengths, 12 sticks total, each one carved with notches so he could identify them in low light, different lengths for different distances. Brennan watched him work. You planning something? Yes. What? System. I'm going to plant markers at measured distances, use them to read wind. When the Germans come, I'll be ready. You think they're coming? Ezra looked north, toward the German positions 1,600 meters distant. I know they're coming. We're surrounded. They need to break us before reinforcements arrive. They'll hit us hard. And when they do, I need every advantage. He was right. On December 22nd, at first light, Ezra planted 6 sticks in the snow. Stick 1, 100 yards. Stick 2, 200 yards. Stick 3, 350 yards. Stick 4, 475 yards. Stick 5, 550 yards. Stick 6, 625 yards. Each one driven 18 inches into the frozen snow. Vertical, clean, perfect. Then he sat in his foxhole and watched them, for hours, making notes, drawing diagrams, learning the wind patterns of this new battlefield. And 800 yards north, in the German tree line, Oberleutnant Werner Hauptmann was watching through his Zeiss scope, trying to understand what the American soldier was doing with all those sticks. The killing
was about to begin. December 23rd, 1944, day 2 of the siege. 8:30 hours. 4 German soldiers emerged from the tree line 380 yards north of Easy Company's position. They moved in a loose patrol formation, rifles at the ready, testing the American perimeter, probing for weakness, looking for a gap they could exploit. Ezra Caldwell saw them the moment they broke from cover. He'd been watching that section of tree line for 90 minutes, waiting for movement. His Garand was already shouldered. His breathing was steady. His hands, despite the cold, were ready. But he didn't fire yet. First, he looked at stick number 3, the 350-yard marker. It stood 18 inches tall in the snow, exactly where he'd planted it the day before. The snow around its base had drifted slightly to the right. The top of the stick showed a barely perceptible lean to the left. Wind from the right. Steady, maybe 6 miles per hour. At 380 yards, that would push his bullet approximately 7 inches right. He adjusted his aim 7 inches left of the lead German's center mass, held his breath, let his heart rate settle between beats, squeezed the trigger. The Garand's report cracked across the frozen field. The lead German dropped like someone had cut his strings. Chest shot, center mass. He was dead before he hit the snow. The other 3 Germans scattered. One dove behind a fallen log. Another sprinted left toward a cluster of pine saplings. The third froze, trying to locate where the shot had come from. Ezra worked the Garand's action. The semi-automatic mechanism ejected the spent casing and chambered a fresh round. He didn't take the second shot immediately. The Germans had found cover. He'd wait. Let them make the next mistake. Brennan, crouched beside him in the foxhole, had the field glasses up. 1 down, 3 dispersed, can't see clear shots. They'll move again, Ezra said. They always do. 2 minutes passed. 3. The German soldiers were learning what it meant to be pinned by someone they couldn't see, someone who could drop them from ranges where they couldn't effectively return fire. Then, the one behind the log tried to low crawl backward toward the tree line. Slow movement. Smart movement. Keeping the log between himself and the American position. But he had to move. And movement created profile. And profile created opportunity. Ezra checked stick number 3 again. The wind hadn't changed. Still drifting right. Still 7 inches at this distance. He aimed through the gap between the log and the snow. Could see maybe 8 inches of the German's torso as he crawled. Upper back. Shoulder blades. Held left to compensate for wind. Fired once. The German stopped crawling. Kill number 30. June 12th to December 23rd. 6 months of combat. 30 confirmed. The 2 remaining Germans broke and ran for the tree line. Full sprint. Panic movement. Ezra let them go. They'd spread the word. 1 American rifleman. 2 kills in 3 minutes. Extreme accuracy at distance. The Germans would be more careful next time. That was fine. Careful enemies moved slower, gave you more time to see them coming, gave you more time to plant sticks and read wind, and make the calculations that kept you alive. Garrett Thorne appeared at the foxhole edge 20 minutes later. His face was wind-burned and serious. Steam rose from his breath in the frozen air. Battalions asking about the engagement. 2 enemy KIA, approximately 380 yards, both center mass shots. Thorne looked at stick number 3 standing in the snow between them and the German tree line, then looked at Ezra. "You're using those markers to read wind." It wasn't a question. "Yes, Sergeant. Does it work?" "You saw the results." Thorne nodded slowly. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition. Understanding that he was watching something unusual. "Keep doing it. Whatever this is, keep doing it." "Yes, Sergeant." At 1420 hours that same afternoon, a German sniper opened fire from a different section of the tree line. The range was longer, maybe 520 yards. The shot missed Brennan's head by 6 inches and buried itself in the frozen wall of the foxhole. Ezra marked the direction, studied the terrain. The shot had come from an elevated position, probably a tree stand or a hasty platform built between branches. German snipers were trained to use vertical positions, height advantage, better observation, harder to detect. He couldn't see the sniper. German doctrine emphasized deep concealment, long cycling positions where only the rifle barrel protruded, nearly impossible to spot against tree bark and shadow. But the sniper would have to fire again, and when he did, there'd be muzzle flash. Tiny signature, fraction of a second, but enough if you were watching for it. Ezra waited. He checked stick number 5, the 550-yard marker. This one told a different story than stick 3. The wind had shifted. Now it was blowing left to right. The snowdrift pattern on the marker's upwind side had reversed. What had been right was now left. Wind change. 9 inches of drift at 550 yards. In the opposite direction from this morning. If he'd fired based on his morning calculations, he would have missed by 18 inches. The wind would have pushed his bullet right when he'd compensated left. The stick had saved him from making that mistake. He watched the tree line, controlled his breathing, waited for the second shot. 15 minutes later, the German sniper fired again. This time at another American position, 50 yards to Ezra's left. Trying to identify American fighting positions, trying to thin the defenders. The muzzle flash was visible for maybe 1/10 of a second, a small orange bloom in the dark shadows of the pines. But Ezra saw it. He marked the location, fixed it in his mind, calculated distance, 520 yards, maybe 530. He checked stick 5 again, wind still left to right, still 9 inches. He aimed 9 inches right of where he'd seen the muzzle flash, elevated slightly to account for the upward angle into the trees, found the space between heartbeats where his body was stillest, fired once, waited. 30 seconds later, a Kar 98K rifle tumbled out of the tree and landed in the snow below. Then a body followed. German sniper, fell 20 feet and landed in a heap that didn't move. Kill number 31. Brennan lowered the field glasses slowly. Jesus Christ, Ezra. You can't even see what you're shooting at. I saw the muzzle flash. That's enough. You shot a man out of a tree at 520 yards based on a muzzle flash and a stick in the snow. Yes. Brennan didn't say anything else. What was there to say? His childhood friend from Ashwood, West Virginia, had just killed a trained German sniper at extreme range using a technique he'd learned hunting squirrels with his father. By 1700 hours, word had spread through Easy Company. Caldwell got 2 more. Kid with the sticks. Shooting Germans nobody else can see. Lieutenant Owen Blackwell came by the foxhole after dark. Brought coffee that tasted like burned dirt but was hot enough to matter. Steam rose from the tin cups in the freezing air. He looked at the 6 sticks planted in the snow ahead of their position. Thorne says you're reading wind with those markers. Yes, sir. Does battalion need to know the details? No, sir. They just need to know the Germans I shoot stay down. Blackwell smiled. First time Ezra had seen the lieutenant smile since Normandy. Fair enough. Keep doing what you're doing. After Blackwell left, Brennan poured himself coffee and looked at his friend. You know the Germans are watching you plant those sticks, right? I know. You think they've figured out what you're doing? Ezra looked north toward the enemy tree line. Somewhere in that darkness, German soldiers were trying to understand the American who kept planting markers in the snow before he killed their men. Not yet, Ezra said, but they will. He was right. 800 yards north, in a hastily constructed sniper position behind 3 fallen pine trees and a wall of snow-covered branches, Oberleutnant Werner Hauptmann studied the American lines through his Zeiss scope. He'd been watching for 2 days, the same American soldier, always in the second foxhole from the left, always planting sticks at specific distances, always checking them before he fired. Today, that American had killed 3 Germans, 2 in the morning engagement, 1 sniper in the afternoon. The sniper had been Hauptmann's friend, Karl Becker. They'd served together on the Eastern Front, survived Stalingrad, fought through the Ukraine, made it all the way to Belgium. Now Becker was dead because an American had shot him out of a tree based on a single muzzle flash. Hauptmann was 42 years old, too old for this war, too experienced to die in it. He'd survived the Russians by learning to think like them, to anticipate them, to understand their methods before they used them against him. This American was using a method Hauptmann had never seen before, The sticks weren't just markers, they were information-gathering tools. The American was measuring something, reading something invisible, using those measurements to compensate for variables that other soldiers ignored. Hauptmann sketched the American position in his logbook,
Drew the 6 sticks in their relative positions, noted the distances as best he could estimate them, tried to understand the system. Then it clicked. Wind. The American was reading wind drift with the markers, planting them at known distances, observing how wind moved around them, using that information to calculate bullet trajectory. Hauptmann sat back against the frozen tree trunk, allowed himself a moment of professional respect, the kind of respect one craftsman gives another. Clever, simple, effective, the kind of field innovation that one battles, the kind of thing you learn from necessity, not from training manuals, but also the kind of innovation that could be countered once you understood it. He made a note in German. Der Amerikaner liest Wind mit Holzmarkierungen. Genialer als gedacht. The American reads wind with wood markers, more clever than anticipated. Then he made another note. Neue Taktik erforderlich. New tactic required. Tomorrow morning, Christmas Day, he would shoot one of the Americans' sticks, remove it from the battlefield, blind the American's wind-reading system. Then he would kill the American who had been killing Germans with calculated precision for 3 days. December 24th, 1944. Christmas Eve, Day 3 of the siege. At 0600 hours before first light, German forces launched a probe attack. 15 soldiers advancing in squad formation, testing American lines, trying to identify weak points for a larger assault. Ezra saw them coming at 0607, still dark enough that most men would have missed the movement, but he'd been watching that approach corridor since 0530. His eyes adjusted to the pre-dawn darkness. He could see shapes moving against shapes, depth against depth. He checked stick number 2, the 200-yard marker. Wind drift minimal, maybe 3 inches right. Light breeze. Nothing that would significantly affect bullet trajectory at close range. The Germans were 220 yards out when he fired his first shot. Lead German dropped. He worked the Garan's action, shifted aim, found the second target, a German soldier trying to drag the first one to cover. Fired again, second German down. The remaining soldiers scattered, some went prone, others ran for cover. Classic dispersal pattern when taking effective fire from an unknown position. Ezra shifted to stick number 3, 350 yards. A cluster of Germans had gone prone behind a small rise in the terrain. Partial cover, not enough. He could see the top of a helmet, maybe 4 inches of profile. Wind at this distance was 7 inches right. He held left, fired. The helmet disappeared. The engagement lasted 32 minutes. The Germans kept trying to advance, kept trying to locate the American rifleman who was systematically destroying their formation. But Ezra had position, had preparation, had 6 sticks telling him exactly where his bullets would go in the frozen morning air. By 0632, 8 Germans were dead in the snow. The survivors retreated to the tree line. 8 kills, single engagement, distances ranging from 220 yards to 615 yards. Every shot calculated, every shot adjusted for wind based on the markers he'd planted 2 days ago. Brennan sat in the foxhole reloading magazines. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, from adrenaline, from watching his friend methodically kill 8 men in half an hour while barely speaking. "You're not even breathing hard," Brennan said. Ezra was checking his rifle, making sure the action was clean, making sure nothing had frozen. The Garand was reliable, but extreme cold could affect any weapon. "Breathing hard makes you miss." "You just killed 8 men." "Yes." "Doesn't that bother you?" Ezra looked at his friend, really looked at him. "Every day, every single one. But they were trying to kill us. So I killed them first. That's the only choice there is." At 0900, Garrett Fawn came by with ammunition resupply. 2 bandoliers of .30-06, 48 rounds in en bloc clips, extra grenades,
Food nobody wanted to eat because it was frozen solid. "You're becoming a problem for the Germans," Thorne said. "Good. Battalion's asking how many kills you have total." Ezra had been keeping count in his notebook, not because he wanted a score, because his machinist's brain needed to track data, needed to understand patterns, needed to quantify what he was doing so he could improve it. "Since Normandy? 43. Thorne was quiet for a moment. 43 confirmed in 6 months. Most snipers don't reach those numbers in years. "I'm not a sniper, Sergeant. I'm just a rifleman who pays attention." "Keep it up. We need every advantage." The afternoon was quiet. No German movement. They were learning, adapting, probably planning something for tomorrow, Christmas Day. That night, Ezra and Brennan shared a chocolate ration bar that had frozen solid. They broke pieces off with their knives and let it melt in their mouths. It tasted like home, like before the war, like childhood in Ashwood, when the biggest problem was whether you'd get coal dust on your Sunday clothes. "You think we'll make it out of here?" Brennan asked. "Yes." "How do you know?" "Because I'm going to kill anyone who tries to overrun our position, and you're going to spot for me, and Thorne's going to keep bringing ammunition, and we're going to do that every day until Patton breaks the siege." Brennan smiled. First time in days. "That simple?" "That simple." But it wasn't simple. Nothing about war was simple. Somewhere in the German tree line, Werner Hauptmann was planning his countermove. He'd watched the American kill 8 soldiers that morning, watched him check the markers before each shot, confirmed his theory about the wind reading system. Now he was going to exploit it. Tomorrow morning, Christmas Day, he would shoot one of the Americans' sticks, remove it from the battlefield, blind the Americans' wind reading system, then he would kill the American who had been killing Germans with calculated precision for 3 days. It was a good plan. It would fail, but Hauptmann didn't know that yet. December 25th, 1944. Christmas morning, 08:15 hours. Ezra was in his foxhole drinking coffee that Thorne had somehow acquired. Real coffee, not the burned substitute they'd been drinking for weeks. It was hot and bitter and perfect. Steam rose in white columns in the frozen air. He was watching stick number 4, the 475-yard marker, observing how the morning wind was moving snow around its base, noting the drift patterns in his little notebook, making sketches, recording data. Then the stick exploded. 1 second it was standing there, 18 inches of carved oak against white snow. The next second it was splinters. Someone had shot his marker. Ezra went flat instantly. Combat reflex. Brennan beside him did the same. They didn't speak. Both understood immediately. German sniper. Deliberate shot. Not random. Not a miss aimed at them. Intentional destruction of the stick. 30 seconds passed. No follow-up shot. Ezra risked a look over the foxhole rim. The marker was gone. Just a small crater in the snow where it had been standing. Splinters scattered in a 3-foot radius. "They figured it out," Brennan whispered. "Yes." "They know you're using the sticks to read wind." "Yes." "What are you going to do?" Ezra was already thinking, already adapting, already planning his counter to their counter, the chess game of snipers, move and countermove, action and reaction. "I'm going to plant a new stick, different location, 520 yards, 30 feet right of where the old one was." "Why?" "Because whoever shot that marker is watching this position, waiting to see what I do. If I plant a new stick, they'll watch the stick, not me." Brennan understood. Bait. Yes. At 08:30, Ezra grabbed stick number 7 from his collection. The reserve markers he'd carved but not yet planted. Moved 20 feet left in the trench system that connected their foxhole to the next position. Came up slowly, deliberately. Made it obvious he was planting a replacement marker. He drove it into the snow, made a show of checking it, adjusting it, ensuring it was perfectly vertical, making it clear this was important to him. Then he ducked back down. Through his scope, 800 yards distant, Werner Hauptmann watched the American plant the new marker, watched him check it carefully, watched him duck back into cover. Perfect. Now the American would rely on that new marker, would check it before his next shot, would expose himself doing so, and Hauptmann would be ready. He'd already ranged the American's position, already calculated wind,
already prepared the shot that would end this problem. He just needed to wait for the American to expose himself again. But Ezra wasn't going to expose himself checking the new stick. Because the new stick wasn't for wind reading, it was a decoy. He already knew the wind at 520 yards, had memorized the patterns around stick number 5 yesterday, had watched how snow moved, how grass bent, how the marker leaned in the breeze. The wind hadn't changed significantly overnight, still 9 inches left at that distance, give or take an inch for minor fluctuations. What he needed now was to find the German sniper who had shot his marker. At 0847, movement, German position, approximately 780 yards north-northeast. Ezra caught it in his peripheral vision, small displacement of snow, tiny shift in the shadow pattern between trees. He didn't move, didn't react, just watched from the corner of his eye. There, again, someone adjusting position behind cover, someone setting up for a shot. Someone who had been watching the American foxhole for 15 minutes waiting for a target to present itself. Ezra checked stick number 6, the 625-yard marker, still standing, undisturbed. Wind drift at that distance was approximately 11 inches right, but the German was closer than 625, probably 780, based on the sight line and terrain features. That changed the calculation. He did the math in his head, machinist's brain, spatial geometry. If wind drift was 11 inches at 625 yards, it would be approximately 13 inches at 780 yards, maybe 14, depending on how wind accelerated across open ground. He couldn't see the German clearly, could only see the displacement, the shadow that was slightly wrong, the negative space where a person was hiding. He aimed at the shadow, held 14 inches left to compensate for wind, elevated for the upward angle, for the extra distance, found the space between heartbeats, fired once. The shadow jerked, then collapsed. For a moment, nothing. Then a Zeiss scope tumbled out of the concealment, expensive German optics catching morning light as it fell. Then a rifle, then a body rolled into the open snow. Hauptmann, kill number 44. Ezra lowered his rifle, chambered a fresh round, waited to see if there were more. No more. 20 minutes later, a German patrol cautiously approached the body. 4 soldiers, moving carefully, expecting American fire. When none came, they retrieved the corpse. Hauptmann's body was carried back to German lines on a stretcher made from rifles and overcoats. In his pockets they found his logbook. On the last page there was a detailed sketch of the American positions, 6 sticks drawn precisely in their relative locations, notes in German explaining the wind reading system, calculations, observations, a final entry, Der Stocktrick, genialer als gedacht. The stick trick, more clever than anticipated. The German patrol leader, Feldwebel Matthias Keller, read the notes, studied the sketch, looked across the field at the American positions where one soldier with markers in the snow had just killed the best sniper in their battalion. Keller was 24 years old, 38 kills on the Eastern Front. He'd learned from Hauptmann, trained under him, respected him more than any other soldier he'd served with. Now he would replace him. But he would not make Hauptmann's mistake. He would not try to counter the stick system. He would not shoot the markers. He would not play the Americans' game on the Americans' terms. He would ignore the sticks, hunt the man, kill him some other way, wait for the right moment, the right circumstances. Keller closed the logbook, put it in his own pack, made a promise to himself and to Hauptmann's memory. The American would die. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon, very soon. December 26, 1944, Day 5. The killing accelerated. German forces were desperate. Patton's Third Army was pushing from the south. Relief was coming. Time was running out. They needed to break American lines, needed to scatter the paratroopers, needed to push through Bastogne before reinforcements arrived and turned the siege into a slaughter. They attacked in waves. The engagement lasted 11 hours. From 6:30 to 1700 hours, the longest sustained combat Ezra had experienced since landing in Normandy. He fell into a rhythm that erased thought, reduced killing to mechanics, to procedure. Check stick. Read wind. Compensate.
acquire target, fire, work action, shift position, reload, repeat. The mathematics of survival reduced to muscle memory. Brennan fed him ammunition and called targets. The sticks told him where bullets would fly. His trigger finger did the rest. The Germans kept coming, kept advancing through their own dead. Determined, professional, desperate men following desperate orders. Ezra kept shooting. Every 3 shots he'd shift position, move 20 feet left or right, make it harder for German artillery spotters to range him, harder for their snipers to target him, harder for them to predict where he'd be. But he always kept the sticks in view, always checked them before firing, always knew exactly where his bullets would go. The wind changed 3 times during the day. Each time Ezra noticed, adjusted, compensated. The sticks told him everything he needed to know. By 1700 hours, when the winter light started failing and the Germans finally broke contact, 32 Germans lay dead in the snow between the tree line and American lines. Kills, 45 through 76, the largest single-day total of his war. His hands were shaking from exhaustion. His shoulder was bruised purple from recoil. 167 rounds fired. His eyes burned from staring through iron sights for 11 hours. But the line held. The Germans hadn't broken through, hadn't even reached the American wire. Ezra had stopped them at 300 yards. Thorne came by after dark, brought hot food, brought ammunition. Brought something else too, recognition that couldn't be expressed in words. "You kept them from breaking through," Thorne said. Ezra nodded, too tired to speak, too tired to do anything but sit against the frozen foxhole wall and try to remember what it felt like to not be killing people. "How many today?" 32. Thorne was quiet for a long moment. "Jesus, Ezra. They kept coming. I kept shooting. Battalion's talking about putting you in for a medal." "I don't want a medal. I want to go home." "We all do." After Thorne left, Brennan looked at his friend, really looked at him, saw the exhaustion, the strain, the weight of what he'd done. "You know tomorrow's going to be worse." "I know. Think the sticks will hold up?" Ezra checked his markers, all still standing except number 4, which Hauptmann had destroyed. He'd planted a replacement that afternoon, numbered it 4B in his notebook. "They'll hold," he said. "Question is whether I will." But he would, because he had to, because Easy Company was counting on him, because men were alive specifically because he could see wind that nobody else could see. December 27th would be the final German push, their last chance to break American lines before Patton arrived. They would throw everything at the American positions, and Ezra Caldwell would be waiting, with his rifle, with his sticks, with his ability to read the invisible and turn it into something that kept men alive. But sitting in his frozen foxhole on the night of December 26th, hands still shaking from the day's work, he allowed himself one thought. 76 men dead by my calculations, 76 faces I'll never forget. He didn't know there would be 27 more tomorrow. Didn't know that his final Bastogne kill count would be 75 over 6 days. Didn't know that a German sniper named Matthias Keller had survived by studying his methods and was planning to follow him to the next battlefield. For now, he just sat in the dark, listened to Brennan breathing beside him, watched his 6 sticks standing in the snow like sentries, and waited for whatever came next. December 27th, 1944. 0430 hours, still dark. Ezra Caldwell hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. His body was beyond exhaustion, past the point where sleep mattered or even seemed possible. He'd entered that strange state of alertness that came after too many hours of combat, where everything felt distant and immediate at the same time, where his hands moved automatically and his mind operated on a level below conscious thought. He sat in the frozen foxhole checking his equipment by touch. The M1 Garand, 8 rounds in the en-bloc clip, action smooth despite the cold. Trigger pull consistent at 4.5 pounds. Sights align. The rifle had fired 626 rounds since Normandy. It had never failed him,
Never jammed, never let him down. He checked his sticks next, could barely see them in the pre-dawn darkness, but he knew where each one stood, had memorized their positions the way other men memorized the Lord's Prayer. Stick 1 at 100 yards, stick 2 at 200, stick 3 at 350, 4B at 475, 5 at 550, 6 at 625. His wind-reading system, his truth-tellers, his edge in a war where edges meant everything. Brennan was sleeping. Ezra had insisted. One of them needed rest. They'd been taking turns for 6 days, but last night Ezra had taken the full watch. Let his friend sleep for 8 hours straight. Brennan would need that energy today. They both would, because today was going to be the worst day yet. Garrett Thorne had told them yesterday evening. Intelligence reports indicated German forces were preparing a major assault. Final push before Patton's relief column arrived. Everything they had. Every soldier, every machine gun, every mortar. One massive wave designed to break American lines and scatter the 101st Airborne before reinforcements could reach Bastogne. The assault would come at dawn. Ezra watched the eastern horizon, watched darkness fade to grey, watched the tree line emerge from shadow into definition. The transformation happened so gradually you couldn't pinpoint the moment it changed. Just like everything else in war, you couldn't pinpoint the moment you stopped being a civilian and became a killer. At 0505, he saw movement. Not just a patrol, not just a probe, an entire company, maybe more. Shapes moving through the trees, formations assembling, officers positioning soldiers. The Germans were staging 600 yards out, just inside the tree line, preparing for the assault that would either break American lines or break themselves trying. Ezra reached over and shook Brennan awake, gentle but firm. They're coming. Brennan was awake instantly. Combat veteran's reflex. Sleep to full consciousness in less than a second. He grabbed the field glasses and looked north. Jesus Christ, that's 100 men, maybe more. At least. We need to call it in. Get artillery on them before they assault. Thorne already knows. He's been watching them stage since 0400. As if summoned by his name, Thorne appeared at the foxhole edge. His face was grim, older than it had been 6 days ago. The siege had aged everyone. Artillery's already firing on the staging areas, but there's too many. Some will get through. How many? Ezra asked. Enough. Thorne handed down 3 additional bandoliers of ammunition, 24 en-bloc clips, 192 rounds, more than Ezra had ever carried at once. The weight of it was sobering. That much ammunition meant they expected him to use it all. You're going to need all of it, Thorne said. They're hitting us across the entire line. But this sector, your sector, they're coming heavy. You're the best shot we have. We need you to break them before they reach the line. What's the distance to our wire? 200 yards. I'll stop them before that. Thorne looked at him. Really looked at him. At this 21-year-old machinist from West Virginia, who had somehow become the deadliest soldier in Easy Company. The kid who'd enlisted because $50 a month extra would help his family. Who'd learned to shoot hunting squirrels. Who'd turned childhood survival skills into a weapon system that killed Germans with mathematical precision. I know you will. At 0530, American artillery opened fire. 155mm howitzers from positions 3 miles to the rear. The shells screamed overhead like freight trains and impacted in the German tree line. Explosions, fire, smoke, trees splintering, snow vaporizing into steam. But the Germans came anyway. They emerged from the tree line at 0545. Not running, walking, steady advance. Professional soldiers who knew they were walking into death, but did it anyway because orders were orders and war was war, and this was the job they'd chosen, or been chosen for. Ezra counted them. 87 soldiers, visible in the growing light. 3 assault waves. First wave, already at 550 yards and closing. Second wave forming up behind them. Third wave still in the trees. He looked at stick 6, the 625-yard marker. Wind was blowing hard, left to right, much stronger than yesterday.
The snow around the stick's base was drifting heavily. The marker itself was bent maybe 5 degrees from vertical. 15 inches of drift at 625 yards, maybe 18 at longer range. The wind had picked up overnight, weather changing, more snow coming. He did the math. Made the calculations that had kept him alive for 6 months. Distance, wind, bullet drop, all the variables that turned shooting from guesswork into science.
The first German was at 580 yards when Ezra fired his first shot of December 27th. The soldier dropped. Ezra worked the action, found the second target, a German carrying an MG-42 machine gun, the kind that could chew through an American position in seconds if it got set up. Checked the wind, same drift, held left to compensate. Fired, machine gunner down. The Germans kept coming, Ezra kept shooting. It became mechanical, automatic, his machinist's brain reducing combat to a series of measurements and tolerances. Distance, wind, elevation, trigger pull, recoil management, follow-through. Each shot was a problem to solve. Each kill was a solution achieved. Check stick, read drift, acquire target, compensate, fire. Work action, shift position, repeat. By 0600, the first assault wave had gone to ground. 8 Germans dead in the snow. Survivors were taking cover behind rises in terrain, behind fallen logs, behind their own dead comrades. Brennan was spotting through field glasses, calling targets, being Ezra's eyes when Ezra needed to focus on shooting.
3 men behind the log, 420 yards, one's trying to set up a machine gun. Ezra shifted to stick 4B. Wind at that distance was 9 inches left, based on the patterns he'd observed. He held right, elevated slightly to clear the log, aimed at where the machine gunner's upper body would be. Fired. Target down, guns out of action. Movement at 490, 2 soldiers flanking left. Ezra checked stick 5, wind still strong left to right, acquired targets, led their movement, calculated where they'd be when the bullet arrived. Fired once, worked action, fired again. Both down. The Germans launched their second wave at 0615. Fresh troops, 40 soldiers advancing in staggered formation, better tactics than the first wave, harder targets. They'd learned from watching their comrades die. Ezra adapted, started shooting at extreme range, 600 yards, 650, forcing the Germans to take cover earlier, disrupting their formation before they could build momentum, breaking their cohesion. It was working, but it was costing ammunition. He was burning through magazines faster than Brennan could reload the empty clips. The brass casings piled up in the foxhole, dozens of them, physical evidence of lives ended. The third wave came at 7:30, the largest, 50 soldiers. The German commander was committing everything. This was the final push. Break through here or fail completely. No reserves left, nothing held back. Ezra's shoulder was screaming from recoil. His hands were cramping from the cold and the constant firing. His eyes were strained from staring through iron sights for 2 hours. But the sticks were still standing, still telling truth, still giving him the edge he needed. He kept shooting, kept calculating, kept solving the problems of distance and wind, and human targets that moved and fell and died.
At 0815, a German officer stood up 680 yards away, stood up fully, exposed himself completely, yelling orders to his men, trying to rally them for one more push, one final effort. It was the longest shot Ezra had attempted at Bastogne. Maybe the longest shot he'd ever attempted in combat, beyond the range of his planted sticks, beyond the distances he'd calculated. He'd have to extrapolate, estimate wind drift based on the patterns he'd observed at closer ranges, apply the mathematical principles and hope they held at extreme distance. At 625 yards, drift was 18 inches left based on stick 6. At 680 yards, it would be more. Wind accelerated over open ground, maybe 22 inches, maybe 24. He split the difference, called it 23 inches, held that much right of the officer's center mass, elevated for the distance, for the bullet drop that would occur over 700 yards of travel, for gravity pulling the round down as it flew. fell on the space between heartbeats where his body was stillest.
Fired. The officer dropped. The German assault broke. The remaining soldiers retreated to the tree line, dragging their wounded, abandoning their dead. The third wave had failed. The final push had been stopped. By 0900, it was over. Ezra had fired 167 rounds, killed 27 Germans in 3.5 hours of sustained combat. December 27th total, 27 kills. Combined with the previous 5 days at Bastogne, 75 total kills. December 23rd through 27th, 6 days, 75 confirmed. He sat back against the frozen foxhole wall. His hands were shaking uncontrollably now, not from fear, from exhaustion, from the physical toll of precision shooting for that long, from the accumulation of stress and cold and killing. Brennan handed him water from a canteen. The water was half frozen. Ezra drank it anyway. Couldn't taste it. Couldn't taste anything. "You stopped them," Brennan said quietly.
"Entire company. You stopped them by yourself."
"Not by myself. You spotted. Thorne brought ammunition. The sticks told me where to shoot." "The sticks are just wood, Ezra. You're the one who knows how to read them." Thorne appeared 20 minutes later. Brought hot coffee somehow. Real food. His face showed something Ezra had never seen there before. Awe. "Battalion counted bodies in your sector," Thorne said. 27 confirmed kills this morning. The Germans tried to break through 6 different points on our line. Your sector was the only one they didn't even reach. You stopped them at 300 yards. The sticks stopped them. No, you stopped them. The sticks just helped. Thorne paused, seemed to be deciding whether to say something, then said it anyway. "There's something else. We found a German officer's body, the one you shot at extreme range. He was carrying orders." "What kind of orders?" "Retreat orders to secondary positions. Dated yesterday. He was supposed to deliver them after the assault. You shot him before he could transmit them to the other units." Ezra understood the implications. So the other German units didn't get the retreat order. "Right. They stayed in place longer than they should have, took more casualties from our artillery. Your shot changed their entire tactical situation." Thorne looked at the 6 sticks standing in the snow, looked at Ezra. "How many total now, since Normandy?" Ezra had been keeping count in his notebook, always keeping count. His machinist's brain needed the data, needed to quantify, needed to understand through numbers. 103. Thorne was quiet for a long time. 103 confirmed kills in 6 months. Most of them in the last 6 days. You know what that makes you? Tired. Thorne almost smiled. That too, but it makes you the most effective soldier in this company. Maybe the whole battalion.
After Thorne left, Ezra sat in the foxhole and looked at his hands. They'd stopped shaking finally. He could feel them again. Feel the cold, feel the soreness, feel the weight of what he'd done. 103 men, 103 fathers, brothers, sons, German soldiers who'd been following orders, who'd probably wanted to go home to their families as much as he wanted to go home to his. He'd killed them all, with calculated precision, with cold mathematics, with sticks in the snow that told him where bullets would fly. "You okay?" Brennan asked. "No." "Want to talk about it?" "No." They sat in silence for a long time. The sun was fully up now. The battlefield was quiet. Bodies lay in the snow between the American and German lines, steam rising from wounds as blood froze. The temperature was dropping, more snow coming. The siege would break tomorrow. Patton would arrive. The Germans would retreat. Easy Company would survive. But Ezra would carry 103 faces in his memory for the rest of his life. Every single one. December 28th, 1944. The day was quieter. German forces were pulling back, consolidating positions, preparing for organized withdrawal. Ezra spent the morning doing what he'd done for 7 days, observing the German tree line, watching for changes, memorizing terrain, looking for things that didn't belong. At 0740 hours, December 29th, he noticed something. A tree that hadn't been there yesterday.
It stood 60 feet north of a large pine he'd been using as a reference point, shorter than the surrounding trees, branches too symmetrical, too perfect, too regular. Ezra watched it for 3 minutes. No movement, no wind sway like the natural trees around it. The other trees bent with the breeze. This one didn't. Artificial. Camouflage. Concealing something large. He called Thorn over, pointed it out without exposing himself above the foxhole rim.
That tree appeared overnight.
Thorn looked through binoculars for 30 seconds. Looks natural to me. It wasn't there yesterday. I've memorized 140 trees in that sector over the past week. That's number 141. Thorn knew better than to question Caldwell's observations at this point. Not after watching him kill 103 Germans in 7 months, using methods nobody else understood, using skills the army couldn't teach. What do you think it is? Heavy weapon. Anti-aircraft gun, maybe. Something big enough to need that much camouflage. Thorn called it into battalion. The S2 intelligence officer was skeptical. Aerial reconnaissance hadn't seen anything. Ground observers hadn't reported it. But they authorized an artillery strike anyway, based on Thorn's recommendation and Caldwell's track record. At 08:23 hours, 6 155mm howitzer shells hit the target coordinates. The artificial tree disintegrated in the first explosion. The second explosion was much larger. Secondary detonation. Ammunition cooking off. The 88mm Flak 36 anti-aircraft gun, hidden beneath the camouflage, was destroyed. 6 German crew killed instantly by the artillery barrage. Intelligence confirmed hours later that the gun had been preparing to fire on Easy Company positions. The attack was scheduled for December 30th at dawn, when the company would advance across open ground toward Foy. Estimated casualties, if the gun had fired, 150 American soldiers. Cut down crossing a field with no cover, slaughtered by an 88mm gun that could fire 15 rounds per minute with pinpoint accuracy. Ezra had saved them by memorizing trees, by noticing one that didn't belong, by using the same observational skills he'd developed watching landscapes in West Virginia mountains. The company knew within an hour. Word spread fast through the foxholes and fighting positions. Caldwell spotted the 88, saved the whole company. Kid with the sticks. Men came by to thank him. Ezra just nodded.
Didn't know what to say. When officers asked how he'd seen it, he said he'd learned to watch landscapes from hunting. Left it at that. He didn't tell them he'd learned it from his father. In mountains where missing details meant his family went hungry, where attention was survival, where seeing what others missed was the difference between eating and starving. Now missing details meant men died, so he didn't miss details. January 13th, 1945. Easy Company attacked the village of Foy. The Germans had fortified the buildings, positioned snipers in upper windows, set up machine gun nests at key intersections, prepared the village for defense. The assault was brutal, urban combat, building to building, room to room, close quarters where rifles mattered less than grenades and determination. Ezra's squad was advancing down a narrow street at 09:47 hours when rifle fire cracked from a building 65 yards ahead. Private Daniels, walking beside Ezra, dropped instantly. Neck wound. Sherrod carotid artery. Dead before he hit the cobblestones.
The squad dove for cover behind a stone wall. More shots followed. High angle, from the building's 3rd floor. German sniper, firing from deep inside a room to minimize exposure. Standard German sniper doctrine. Long cycle line position, minimal profile, nearly impossible to spot from street level. Ezra studied the building. 3 stories, stone construction, slate roof. 6 windows on the top floor facing their position. 5 were empty. 1 had a shadow that was slightly wrong, too dark in the upper right corner, too uniform. Shadow patterns didn't match the others. He watched for 2 minutes, saw a faint flicker, muzzle flash reflecting off an interior wall deep inside the room. The sniper was in the 6th window, positioned maybe 10 feet back from the opening, invisible to anyone at ground level unless you were looking for shadow patterns that didn't match.
Unless you'd spent months learning to see things that were almost invisible.
Problem. No sticks here. Urban environment, cobblestones. Couldn't plant markers. Different terrain than Bastogne, different methods required. Solution: improvise. Ezra ripped a strip of cloth from his jacket sleeve, 3 inches wide, 6 inches long, tied it to a piece of fence wire 30 feet away along the stone wall. The cloth fluttered in the wind, right to left, steady, maybe 6 miles per hour. Belgium winter wind, cold and constant. At 65 yards, that would push his bullet approximately 4 inches right. He told Brennan to stay down, told the squad to stay down, told them not to fire or move or do anything that would draw attention. Then he stood up, walked into the middle of the street, fully exposed. No cover, no concealment, just standing there with his Garand in plain sight. The German sniper fired immediately. Professional reflexes. Target presents itself, you take the shot.
The round snapped past Ezra's head. 6 inches, miss. Close enough to hear the sonic crack, close enough to feel the displacement of air, close enough to know that if the German sniper had aimed 6 inches to the right, Ezra Caldwell would be dead. But Ezra didn't flinch. He dropped to one knee, shouldered the Garand, aimed at the shadow in the 6th window, the shadow he couldn't actually see clearly, the target that existed only in his understanding of how light and dark should behave in a 3rd-story window on a January morning in Belgium. Held 4 inches left to compensate for wind measured by a strip of cloth tied to fence wire. Elevated 3 inches for the upward angle from street level to 3rd floor. Found the space between heartbeats where his body was stillest. Fired once. Didn't fire a second shot. Stood up, slung his rifle over his shoulder, walked back to cover behind the stone wall. The squad thought he'd missed, thought he'd just exposed himself for nothing, thought the stress had finally broken him. Then a German helmet tumbled from the 6th window, fell 3 stories, clattered on the cobblestones. 5 seconds later, the German sniper's body followed. Feldwebel Matthias Keller fell 3 stories, landed in a broken heap on the street, dead before impact. When Easy Company cleared the building an hour later, they found the sniper's fighting position in the attic room, Kar 98K rifle with Z F4 scope, still set up on a makeshift rest, aimed at the street below. Keller was slumped against the back wall where he'd fallen after the bullet hit him. Single gunshot wound, center of the forehead, entrance just above the bridge of the nose, exit through the back of the skull, perfect placement. Instant death. They found his notebook in his pocket, standard issue German military notebook. Inside were sketches of American positions, notes about Easy Company's defensive tactics at Bastogne, observations about American firepower and coordination. And on one page, a detailed drawing. 6 sticks planted in snow, labeled with estimated distances. Notes in German explaining how an American sniper read wind with wooden markers. Diagrams showing wind drift calculations. Sketches of the stick positions relative to American foxholes. The title at the top of the page, written in careful German script, Der Stocktrick. Below it, a note dated December 28th. Survived Bastogne by avoiding engagement with this American. Hauptmann killed trying to counter the system. Will not underestimate American field innovation again. Will wait for urban environment where sticks cannot be used. Keller had been there, had watched from the German lines, had seen Ezra kill 75 Germans in 6 days using a system nobody had encountered before, had studied the technique, had survived by not engaging, by waiting. Then he'd followed Easy Company to Foy, waited for urban combat where the stick system wouldn't work, where the American would be vulnerable. And he'd died anyway, shot through the forehead by a man who'd improvised with a strip of cloth when his sticks weren't available. Kill number 104. Ezra Caldwell's final kill of World War II. He sat alone against a wall after the building was cleared. His hands were shaking again. First visible emotion since Bastogne, since Christmas Day when he'd killed Hauptmann. Brennan found him there. "You okay?" "I just killed a man by shooting at a shadow, based on a piece of cloth fluttering in the wind. He would have killed 10 more of us if you hadn't stopped him. He killed Daniels.
would have kept killing until someone got him. I know. Doesn't make it easier. Lieutenant Owen Blackwell appeared, knelt down beside Ezra, put a hand on his shoulder. The gesture of a commander who respected his soldier. You did what you had to do.
That skill you have, seeing what others miss, reading patterns, understanding terrain, it saves lives. That's what matters. That's what I'll remember. 104 men, sir. I've killed 104 men in 7 months. Blackwell was quiet for a moment. And you've saved hundreds more. Every German you stopped was one less threat to your brothers. Every position you spotted was one less ambush. You kept Easy Company alive through Normandy, through France, through Bastogne, through Foy. That's what I'll remember when this war is over. But it didn't feel like what mattered. Not in that moment. Not sitting against a wall in a destroyed Belgian village, with the body of a German sniper lying in the street 20 yards away. Not with Daniels dead. Not with 103 other faces joining him. It felt like weight, like burden, like something that would never get lighter, no matter how many years passed. The war ended in May 1945. Germany surrendered. Ezra was in Austria when it happened. Hitler's Eagle's Nest, Bavarian Alps, beautiful country, wrong reasons for being there. He had 104 confirmed kills, more than any other soldier in Easy Company's history, more than most snipers who'd fought for 4 years with specialized training and scoped rifles. He'd done it in 7 months, with iron sights, with sticks planted in snow, with a technique his father had taught him hunting squirrels in West Virginia mountains because missing shots meant his family went hungry. The army used a point system to determine who went home first. Combat time, wounds, decorations, added up to determine priority. Ezra didn't have enough points. He'd have to wait in Europe for transport. Could be weeks. Could be months. In August, Easy Company held a lottery. Winner got early transport home, a slot on a transport plane leaving from a French airfield on August 12th. Ezra won. He was going home. Brennan was happy for him. Genuinely happy.
You're going back to Ashwood. Back to your family. You made it. We both made it. You more than me. You're the one who kept us alive. On August 10th, 1945, Ezra's truck convoy was heading to the airfield. 3 trucks, 20 men, all of them going home. A civilian car swerved into the road, wrong side, driver drunk or panicked or just not paying attention. The lead truck swerved to avoid collision. The second truck followed. The third truck, Ezra's truck, overcorrected, rolled off the road into a drainage ditch. Ezra was in the truck bed. No seatbelt, no restraints, just sitting there with his duffel bag and his rifle and his orders sending him home. He was thrown against the truck bed when it rolled, fractured his pelvis, broke 3 vertebrae in his lower back, lost consciousness, hearing Brennan shouting his name. He woke up 4 days later in a French military hospital. The war was over. He'd survived Normandy, France, Bastogne, Foy, and 7 months of combat.
A truck accident had finally gotten him. He spent 4 months in that French hospital, 6 more months in a stateside recovery facility in Virginia, learning to walk again, physical therapy, pain that was worse than anything he'd experienced in combat because it was constant and purposeless. Brennan visited when he could, drove down from Richmond where he'd gotten a job in construction. You survived the whole war, got beaten by a damn truck. That's not right. Ezra tried to smile, couldn't quite manage it. Irony noted. He was discharged from the army in January 1946. Purple Heart for his injuries. No other medals. No public commendation. No Bronze Star for the 88mm gun he'd spotted. No Silver Star for the 75 Germans he'd killed at Bastogne. Nothing beyond the respect of the men who'd served with him and knew what he'd done. Garrett Thorne wrote a letter before Ezra left. You're the finest soldier I ever commanded. Your observations saved more lives than any weapon we had. The stick trick saved Easy Company at Bastogne. You deserve recognition you'll never seek. But we'll remember. I'll make sure we remember. Owen Blackwell wrote too. 104 confirmed kills in 7 months. 150+ lives saved through observation and innovation. You changed how we think about field improvisation. Thank you for your service.
Ezra folded the letters carefully, put them in his duffel bag, took them home to Ashwood, West Virginia. Population still 462. Coal town that hadn't changed. Same houses, same streets, same mountains. He got his old job back at Clinchfield Coal Corporation. Machinist. Same lathes he'd worked before the war. Same precision work. Cutting parts to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. He married in 1947. Girl from the next town over. Rebecca. They'd known each other before the war. Raised 3 children. 2 boys, 1 girl. Lived a quiet life.
When people asked if he'd been in combat, he said he'd been in Europe. If they pressed, he said he'd been a paratrooper with the 101st. He never mentioned the 104 kills, never mentioned the sticks, never mentioned Bastogne, or Hauptmann, or Keller, or any of it. Rebecca knew something had happened over there, could tell from the way he sometimes woke up at night, the way he'd stand at the window, staring at nothing. But she didn't push, let him carry it however he needed to carry it. In 1985, his grandson, Lucas, asked about the war. Ezra was 62 years old, still living in Ashwood, still working at the coal corporation, though he'd moved into a supervisory role. His hands weren't as steady anymore. "Grandpa, were you in World War II?" "Yes." "Did you fight?" "Yes." "Did you ever shoot anybody?" Ezra looked at his grandson, 12 years old. Same age Ezra had been when his father taught him to read Wind with Sticks, when he'd learned that attention was survival. "Come with me tomorrow. I'll show you something."
The next day, Ezra took Lucas hunting in the same mountains where his father had taught him 47 years earlier. Same ridges, same valleys, same deer trails. He carved a stick from a pine branch, showed Lucas how to plant it, how to watch snow move around it, how to read wind drift from the patterns. Then he demonstrated. Shot a deer at 200 yards, perfect heart shot. 1 round from an old .30-06 rifle. Clean kill. The deer dropped instantly. Lucas was amazed. "You learned this as a kid?" "Yes, from my father. Same mountains, same technique." "Did you use it in the war?" Ezra was quiet for a long time, looking at the mountains, looking at the stick planted in the snow, looking at his grandson who deserved to know, who needed to understand that skill came from necessity, and necessity came from poverty, and poverty taught lessons that prosperity never could. Every day for 6 days at Bastogne. December 22nd through 27th, 1944. Planted sticks, read wind, made shots. Kept me alive through 104 kills. Lucas stared. 104? That's a lot. Yes. Did it bother you? Every day. Every single one. Still does. Then why did you do it? Ezra looked at his grandson. Because they were trying to kill my friends, and I had a skill that could stop them. So I used it. That's all war is, Lucas. Using whatever skills you have to keep your friends alive, one more day. They walked back in silence, Lucas carrying questions he didn't know how to ask, Ezra carrying memories he'd never fully shared with anyone except Brennan and the men of Easy Company who'd been there. That night, Ezra told his grandson the whole story, the sticks, the wind reading, the mathematics of survival, the faces he still saw in dreams, Hauptmann's logbook with Der Stocktrick written at the top, Keller following him to Foy, the 88mm gun, the 104 kills, all of it. He told him because Lucas needed to know, because the story mattered, because simple tricks won complicated wars and someone should remember, because his grandson was the right age to understand that survival sometimes meant killing, and killing sometimes meant survival, and there was no clean way to separate the two. In June 1994, Garrett Thorne died at age 78, heart attack, quick, didn't suffer. Before he died, he wrote a final letter to Ezra, found in his desk drawer by his daughter, mailed to Ashwood, West Virginia, along with a note explaining her father had wanted Ezra to have it. The letter. Ezra, I'm dying. Heart giving out. Doctor says weeks, maybe days. Need to tell you something I never said when it mattered. You saved Easy Company. Not once. Dozens of times. 104 Germans dead. 150 Americans alive because you planted sticks in snow and red wind nobody else could see. You never bragged. Never sought recognition. Just did the job.
That's why you were the best of us. I'm telling Lucas, your grandson, he deserves to know his grandfather is a hero. Whether you accept that word or not, your sticks were the most effective weapon in the 506th PIR, more effective than machine guns or mortars or artillery, because your weapon was attention, observation, seeing what others missed. Thank you for keeping us alive. Thank you for teaching us that simple solutions often work better than complicated ones. Thank you for showing us that skills learned in poverty can save lives in war. I'll see you on the other side, brother. Garrett Thorne, 1st Sergeant, Easy Company. The letter arrived June 12, 1994. Ezra read it alone in his workshop, the same workshop where he'd carved sticks 50 years ago before leaving for war, the same workbench where he'd learned machinist precision. He cried for the first time since 1945. He framed the letter, hung it beside his workbench, never showed it to anyone except Lucas, never mentioned it to Rebecca or his children, just hung it there where he could see it when he worked. Reminder of what he'd done, who he'd been, what it had cost. In 2003, historian Stephen Ambrose interviewed Ezra for a book about Easy Company, Band of Brothers, documenting the men who'd fought from Normandy to Austria. Ambrose came to Ashwood, sat on Ezra's porch, asked questions, recorded answers. Can you demonstrate this stick technique? Ezra was 80 years old, back problems from the truck accident, arthritis in his hands, but he could still shoot. He carved a stick from a branch, planted it in the yard at 100 yards, showed Ambrose how to read wind drift from snow patterns. Then he demonstrated with an old M1 Garand rifle he'd been gifted by a veterans organization, shot at targets at 200 yards, then 300, 6-inch groups, iron sights. 80 years old with arthritis, Ambrose was stunned. You can still shoot like this? Ezra lowered the rifle. Stick shows what's real. Everything else, wind, snow, your own eyes, they deceive. But that piece of wood planted in the ground, it doesn't know how to lie. Learned that at age 8 from my father. Used it to kill 104 Germans at age 21. Still works at age 80. The book was published in 2003. Ezra's story was in it. The stick trick, the Bastogne kills, the 88mm gun, Keller's notebook. But nobody paid much attention. Just another veteran. Just another technique. Just another war story in a book full of war stories about brave men doing extraordinary things. That was fine with Ezra. He'd never wanted attention, never wanted recognition, just wanted to go home, make precision parts, raise his family, live quietly in the mountains where he'd learned to see what others missed. June 17, 2009. Ezra Caldwell died at home, age 86, lung cancer, diagnosed 3 months earlier. Declined aggressive treatment, said he'd had a good run. His family was with him. Rebecca, his 3 children. Lucas, other grandchildren. His final words, whispered to Lucas, who was holding his hand. Tell them the sticks worked. Tell them simple wins complicated. The funeral was June 22, 2009. Over 1,000 people attended. Veterans from Easy Company traveled from across America. Old men now, in their 80s, walking with canes. But they came. Silas Brennan gave the eulogy. Age 86, voice shaking but strong. Last surviving member of the squad he and Ezra had shared. Ezra Caldwell killed 104 Germans with a rifle and some sticks carved from branches. The United States Army gave him the rifle. West Virginia mountains gave him the idea. God gave him the eyes to read wind others couldn't see. He saved 150 more lives at Bastogne by seeing one tree that wasn't there yesterday. 254 American lives directly saved by one mountain hunter who read the wind like scripture. He never wanted credit, never bragged. Worked as a machinist for 40 years like he'd never been to war. But we who served with him knew Ezra Caldwell was the most dangerous man in easy company, and the most humble. The Germans called it der Stock-Trick. We just called it Ezra being Ezra, seeing what others missed, doing what others couldn't. He's gone now. But what he did, what he proved, that stays. Simple tricks win complicated wars. Attention matters more than technology. And sometimes the best weapon is just a stick planted in snow and the wisdom to read what it tells you. The casket was draped with an American flag. His old M1 Garand rifle rested beside it. And on top of the casket, 6 carved sticks, each one 18 inches long, carved from oak, each one numbered with Roman numerals, 1 through 6, representing 6 days at Bastogne, 6 days when wooden markers and mountain-taught observation changed the course of battle. After the burial, Lucas planted a 7th stick beside his grandfather's grave. He'd carved it that morning, inscribed it with words in English and German. Der Stock-Trick. Ezra Caldwell, 104 kills, December 22nd to 27th, 1944. He saw what others missed. Wind blew across the Ashwood Cemetery. Snow began to fall. Winter funeral in the mountains where